Hey you guys, it's Peter and welcome to my channel, Peter Boom Boom Reviews Stuff. And I am back for another review of a television show. And today I'm going to be talking about American Horror Story NYC. And my husband and I started watching this show earlier this week. I think it came out on the 18th. We were very, very excited to watch this as huge Ryan Murphy fans and lovers of the franchise of American Horror Story. We couldn't wait for this new season to come out. And I have to say that one thing that I really liked about going into this season was that based on the trailer and based on little known facts about the cast even, and what they had released, I really had no idea of what the show was going to be about. I had no idea whatsoever. And so I was pleasantly surprised in going into the show with kind of this air of mystery and suspense and intrigue. Whereas in the past, you know, knowing that it was going to be Freak Show or Coven or whatever, you kind of had an idea of what it was going to be about. Not to say that that made it any less, you know, great for that season. I think to this day, Coven is probably my favorite season of American Horror Story. So, but anyway, so I went into it and I had really no idea of what it was going to be about, except for that I knew that Zachary Quinto was in it and I knew that Sandra Bernhard was in it. And Sandra Bernhard is one of my favorite people of life. To this day, I credit her with being somebody that was a huge part of my coming out and being able to be myself. And when I was in high school, a senior in high school, I had her tape of her live show called Without You, I'm Nothing. And I listened to that tape every single day. I knew it by heart. If I played it right now, I would probably know all the words by heart. And I have loved Sandra Bernhard for so long, and just been such a huge fan, that to see her as part of the Ryan Murphy, you know, like, universe. It was so funny because I actually mentioned this on my vlog. I was saying that I wonder if, like, Ryan Murphy has, like, a huge company Christmas party, and then it's, like, Sarah Paulson and, you know, Sandra Bernhard and Zachary Quinto and, like, you know, Leslie Grossman and all these people, you know, that are part of, like, Evan Peters and all these people that are part of his, like, you know, the Ryan Murphy universe. And they all come to this, like, company Christmas party every year, you know? But anyway, so that's all I really knew, and that was because I had seen a photo still of Sandra Bernhard and Zachary Quinto, like, walking off of, like, they were walking off of a set together or something like that. And that was all I knew, and that it took place in NYC, or New York City. And so going into it, I had heard that it was going to be a lot of separate stories. Like, each episode was going to be a separate story. In fact, when my husband and I were sitting here watching it, I said that to him. And I was kind of, like, not excited about that because as somebody that enjoys the American Horror Stories, I'm not a huge lover of them. In fact, from the last season, I think there's only 2 that I really liked out of the whole season. So I wasn't like, we've already got the stories, we don't need to repeat that, let's do, like, a full season. And even though I liked the last season of American Horror Story, I didn't love the way that it was split. I will say it is my dream at some point to have a role as an extra, or even as a character role, just a talking role, maybe one line to be in a Ryan Murphy show at some point. Not as a funny character, but anyway, just as something very dramatic and serious. And it was funny because I started getting tweeted to, and people were like, this was before I had watched the show, and people were like, did I just watch Peter Monn in the newest series? Because I had been talking about the series. And so people were like, did I just watch Peter Monn in the newest season of American Horror Story? And I was like, which character are you talking about? And they were talking about the character that is played by Joe, I think his name is Mantello, and he plays the editor of the newspaper in the show. And he also played the guy, that very spooky guy on The Watcher that killed his family in 1995, which I don't think he looks anything alike in either show, which is great that he's, you know, such a, he transitions so well from one show to the next. Okay, so let me talk about this show. So, and like I say in all of my videos that I do, this show, or this video, will have spoilers in it. So the show starts off, and it is a pilot, and it looks like several flight attendants getting off of a flight. It takes place in 1981 in New York City, and they go to a hotel and whatever, and it was so funny because my husband and I, we were sitting there, And I said, so one of the flight attendants comes out of her hotel room, like when the pilot's going in, and she's like in a negligee, and she says, you know, something, and he goes, no, I'm married. And she says, well, the thing about this is you can take these off and on, like the ring. And so he goes into his hotel room, and my husband's like, he's a good husband. And I go, he's on the down low, watch. He's gonna come out in this whole leather outfit. I don't know how, I just knew. And then he packs and unpacks all this kind of stuff. It kind of reminded me of the scene from the movie Longtime Companion. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie, but it's a fantastic movie about HIV and AIDS in the 80s in New York City and a group of friends that it affects. And there's a scene, and it's not a main character. It's just like this guy that's a waiter in a restaurant, and they show him go home, and he puts on this leather outfit, and then he like walks down the street. And the leather community, even though it's still huge today, in the gay community, I think in the 80s was such a huge subculture of the gay community, even more so than it is today. And I think like for people to transition from suit and tie to like the leather community back then as well, you know. I know even in Indianapolis, when I came out in 1990, we had like 2 leather bars, and I don't think we have any today. So, but anyway, so the show starts in 1981. He goes to like, I think it's like Christopher Street piers, which have been known for like prostitution and picking up. It's interesting because Ryan Murphy kind of mixes the show Pose that he did, which is one of my favorite television shows of life, with like several different other TV shows. But interestingly enough, the entire show is gay-centered and themed around the LGBTQ community, and QIA plus community. And I'm so thankful that he is giving this show back to the community. And you know, I was sitting there thinking, and I even said to a friend of mine, it'll be interesting to see the response, because I think like there are a lot of people that are, you know, heterosexual that would be like, I don't know that I really want to watch this. Like there's a lot of this, it's not interesting to me and whatever. And you know, what's so crazy about that is, hey, we've watched your shows for years, okay? You want to watch a Ryan Murphy show that has to deal with the LGBTQ plus community in the 1980s, you're going to have to watch it. I'm sorry, because we've been watching your shows for a long time. I mean, we have. Let's just be for real. You know what I mean? I've seen enough straight PDA to last me a lifetime, you know? Not to mean that I feel like it needs to be shoved down somebody's throat, but I'm thankful that there's a show, and there's many shows, but I'm thankful that he's taking this, right? And it's all what that's about. It's not like just one character. It's not like this hidden topic. Like the whole thing is about that. The whole thing. The editor-in-chief is the editor-in-chief of a gay, like, owned and operated newspaper that is very, I would say, similar to the Village Voice in New York City at the time. Sandra Bernhardt is one of the reporters. She is a lesbian reporter that wants to report on women's topics on the issue. His boyfriend that is played by, is it Russell? Is that his name? I can never remember. Russell Tovey, who I love from the show Looking. My husband said he was on Quantico too. I don't remember that, but he is so good looking, so hubba hubba. He plays the detective that is, he's an in the closet detective on the New York Police Department, and he is investigating the serial killer that is happening to gay men. So there's a serial killer that is this huge hulking leather guy with a leather mask on that is killing gay men, okay? But you don't really know who it is. You don't know if there's one or two, because at one point, the editor of the newspaper, he goes to do this investigation at this bar, and he gets like drugged in his drink, and then he gets taken back to who we think is the serial killer's house, and the guy's like getting ready to kill him, and he opens his shirt, and there's a tattoo there, a Marine Corps tattoo, and he says, I can't have you served twice. Basically, he was like in the service too, I think, and he says something like, I can't have you served twice, so I'm going to send you back out, is basically what he says, and he goes, you can tell the police, but they're not going to do anything about it, because they don't care. And that's really the premise of the whole show, is that the police do not care about the plight of gay men in New York City in the 80s. And so anyway, from the very beginning, it's like the pilot goes out and he goes to the St. Christopher, I think it's the Christopher Street, the Christopher Street Pier Bridges or whatever they're called, and he is murdered, but you don't see it happening, and then they find his headless body, and then they find his head later, and really the police don't care, and they're not really issuing any kind of investigation. At the same time that this is happening, Billie Lourd, who I absolutely adore, she is like a doctor, and I think she's supposed to play the doctor, I can't remember what the name of the movie is, but she's a really famous doctor from the 80s that worked with a lot of AIDS patients. And Julia Roberts played her in the movie that was with Mark Ruffalo. Do you guys know who I'm talking about? I should probably look it up, but I'm not going to. But anyway, I think it was called like A Normal Heart or something like that. And she played this really famous doctor that like saw and was like right on the cutting edge of working with a lot of AIDS patients at the time. I think that's who her character is supposed to be or based around. But at the same time, she's like investigating these deer on Fire Island, who I really think it's like this, they're very ill. And I don't know if this is based on any kind of truth. I read an article in the Rolling Stone that talked about this, and I didn't really see any correlation of like where there was truth to this story. But they go into Fire Island, which if you don't know what Fire Island is, it's this island off of New York City that is known for where gay men have gone since, I mean, like the 30s, right? And they have vacation homes there in the summer. It's a party place for gay guys in the summer. In fact, a movie just came out this summer called Fire Island. It was fantastic. My husband and I watched it. We loved it. And so they have all these deer there. And there's a scene where she says they have to rid the island of all these deer because the deer are going to spread this virus. And it's a rash that they have, and then they're going to give it to humans possibly. And so all of these police officers go out there to kill all these deer. And there's this scene when the deer, and it's these like very young deer, are kind of running around. And this is on the heels of her finding out about a lot of her patients having this rash. And it was at this point that I was like, is this an analogy? Like, are these deer representative of innocent gay men coming out in the 80s and being killed and being slaughtered like these deer? Like, is this an analogy to HIV and AIDS in the 80s? I mean, if you know anything and have watched even one documentary, what you know is before the gay men's health crisis, before, you know, what's really interesting about this show, and I will say, is like Sandra Bernhardt and her character and her two friends that are on the show is that lesbians in New York City were such a huge part of helping gay men and AIDS in the 80s. And so I have to believe that's going to be a huge part of this show, right? Because she meets up with this doctor at the end of the second episode. We were so excited when we found out there were 2 episodes. And she says to her, the government is trying to come for this, like, you know, certain collection of people, basically gay men. And so I think that's what it's going to be about. I think it's going to be about all of this. But at the same time, what's really interesting is there's this character who's a photographer in it, and he's younger, which is confusing to me. But he's very similar, his work that you see. The reason we find him is because this guy whose friend is supposedly killed by the serial killer is trying to find out who did it. So he goes like the bathhouses, which were a huge part of gay culture in, you know, they still are in some places, but that were a huge part of gay culture in the 1980s in New York City. He goes there and he sees this picture of, which was really interesting to me, that there was like singing, like Patti LuPone is there and she's like singing at this bathhouse and people are like, it was just really interesting to me to see that. Anyway, so there's a picture of this guy in a leather mask, and he's like, oh, that's the guy that took my friend because he saw him. So he wants to find the photographer, so he goes to the photographer's house. Now, the work that the photographer does, which is like orchids and naked guys, is very similar to Robert Mapplethorpe. And I immediately was like, is this supposed to be like the work of Robert Mapplethorpe? I just was really like, that has to be what it is. What's interesting about it is that Zachary Quinto, I don't really know his role, but he plays like his like agent or his boyfriend. He is his boyfriend, but kind of like they do their own thing. I'm very confused about Zachary Quinto's role in it, except for that underneath this apartment that they have, he is keeping this guy, this guy was walking out of this bar, this leather bar, and the payphone rang, and he took the payphone call, and the guy told him to come to his apartment and they could have some fun and whatever, right? So this guy goes there, and then at the end of the show, you see that Zachary Quinto is keeping him down in this cage. When I read the Rolling Stone article suggested that this was Ryan Murphy, that Ryan Murphy was actually talking about 2 different serial killers in this show. And so we're seeing that really what the show is about is just the murder and the plight of gay men in New York City in the 80s, right? Okay, which that may be the case, that we're being hit from all these different sides. What's interesting, and I have to say, as somebody that came out in 1990, you know, I talk about this a lot today. It's like, I feel like so much respect needs to be paid to the men and women that came before us, because, you know, I came out in 1990 on the heels of the AIDS crisis, and I just, you know, I remember like hearing these stories and whatever, and it just is like, but it was still a very, very scary time, even in 1990, to come out in the world, and the violence and the violent acts that we saw, and people, you know, like, you did not walk down the street holding hands in 1990, you just didn't, you know, and so there's very much about this show that is, to me, some degree, feels like it hit home to when I came out. So anyway, I was reading this Rolling Stone article, and in the Rolling Stone article, he says in there that, or the author says in there, that Ryan Murphy puts in the show The Last Call Killer, which was an actual serial killer in New York City. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting, because I have a true crime book club that I run with my good Judy Mel. Hi, Mel. And we were reached out to by the publisher, and the publisher sent us the books, and then we even did like a giveaway on our book club, and we read The Last Call Killer. I think it was his name is like, I just looked it up. Anyway, Elon something. And we read the book for our book club. And I remember the whole story, and I remember who the killer was, and I remember what happened, and I don't remember any leather people, and I don't remember any of that. I remember piano bars. I remember a lot of guys going to piano bars and getting picked up that way, but I don't remember all that. So it's interesting to me that, like, that's kind of being changed a little bit. But I do think that, like, from, you know, like a gay historical point of view of like us being people that have, to some degree, and I know people aren't going to like this when I say this, but it is what it is, that we've been hunted for some time, you know, to some degree. Like, it's interesting to me, you know, like, are you going to, there's a lot of different organizations that you could throw out there. And then I felt at some point watching the show that it really did feel to me as if these serial killers, because I didn't know that this was The Last Call Killer at the time, right? That these serial killers to me really felt like an analogy for HIV and AIDS at the time, because you have to remember that HIV and AIDS came out between like 78 and 81, right? So at the time that this is coming out, these people are coming into this doctor's office, and she has this rash, and they're just figuring out. The very end of the episode 2, she says the words Kaposi sarcoma, and when she says that, I'm like, they haven't mentioned AIDS or HIV in this show yet. So I have a feeling that's to come, and I have a feeling that's going to be a major factor of this show. I can't imagine Ryan Murphy would pick the year 1981, which was such a prominent year for the coming to terms with HIV and AIDS in our country and in our world, and that they wouldn't do that. You know, she does talk a little bit about this other disease at this time, but I don't think she says the words. If she does, I may have completely missed it. So she talks about compromising immune systems, and she talks about that in there. But anyway, so please let me know in the comment section below if I missed that part. But I think that that's going to be a bigger part in there too. And I think it's really just about, you know, the LGBT community at that time in New York City, you know, and how scary of a time that was, and really in itself that was a horror story. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comment section below. I love you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.